to the Studio Soundtrack. In this episode, Marina sits down with Betsy Eby, an artist-musician who is known for her abstract and caustic paintings. Eby's work reflects her personal connection to the landscapes of her studios in Maine and Georgia, masterfully exploring the interconnectedness of sound and sight. She seeks to capture the timeless meditative rhythms of the natural world, while also addressing the broader themes of environmental and societal harmony. She earned her bachelor's in art history from the University of Oregon. She has held numerous solo and group shows in the US and internationally over the last 26 years, including at galleries in New York, Rockland, New Orleans, and many more. Her art is part of various esteemed collections, including the Lauren Rogers Museum of Art, the Georgia Museum of Art, and many more. Eby's work has been widely covered in publications like American Art Collector, National Geographic, and many more. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Also, how is Maine right now?
It's been the most incredible summer. Last summer we had rain, fog the entire summer, and this summer it's like we got redemption. It's been fabulous. It's sunny and warm, and we're gonna get remnants of that Debbie hurricane tomorrow and Saturday.
Yeah.
But that's good because we have a rain barrel full of drinking water. So we have we get our drinking water through a catchment system. So we always want some good amount of rain, preferably in the evening.
Well, that's interesting. I actually didn't know that that's how you guys have water, is just rainwater.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. We have this whole system. It's a 200-gallon barrel. It catches it off the roof, and then it goes through this elaborate filtering system with a UV light. It disinfects everything and purifies everything. And that's been the last 2 summers. And so we are water autonomous for the most part, if nature provides. How's and we've been painting, and it's just been this dreamy summer. I had my family out for a week from Oregon, and that was great. And then now we're just going back and focusing in our studios. This morning I like to get up before sunrise, and I watch the sunrise over on the east side of the island. And I sit and I read, and I write, and then I meditate, and then I watch the sunrise, and then exercise, and then get into painting. But then this morning I picked blueberries because it's been a really abundant harvest. So Bo and I were both like picking blueberries for like 2 hours.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that's so cool. How many are growing on the island? Like, how much? Is it all over?
They're wild.
Yeah.
I mean, they're wild. So it's covered. And so we have these spots where we know where they are. And we just, it's, over the course of the years, they've just propagated, and they grow everywhere.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. How's life in Charleston? Outside of Charleston?
It's good. We had Hurricane Debbie for the last 3 days, and thankfully it was not that bad here. Like in Hollywood, there was no flooding or anything like that. Downtown Charleston got quite a bit of water, but not as bad as things have happened before. So it was fine.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So you are in Maine now, and so you paint in Maine on the summers, and you also live in Georgia for half the year. So how is painting in these two different environments? How does that affect your work?
Well, I think because my background is, I was born in Seaside, Oregon, so that's it's a coastal town, and when I was a kid, I was on the Pacific a lot, and it's just I think because of my upbringing and my ancestry, I'm very connected to sort of the wilds of nature, and I joke that I'm sort of a wild child at heart because my I think it started with, ancestrally, my grandparents. My grandfather was kind of a prospector, and so my great grandfather was sort of a prospector, and he moved west, and he moved into an opportunity to run the general store, which was called the Trading Post, actually on the Native American Indian reservation of Nia Bay, out on the very very western point of the United States, aside from Alaska. And so it was a very I mean, you had to be very hardy to live there. And so my great grandfather lived there, and then and ran the general store, the trading post, and then electrified the reservation and did all of these things with timber. And then my grandmother and grandfather moved there, and then my grandmother and grandfather ended up running the general store, the trading post. And then my mother was raised out there. My uncle was raised out there. And my mom, I think, when she was young, she had a pet deer,
Ah,
and like
I
a
love
pet
that.
baby deer. And
Yeah.
she had a horse that would just run wild on the beach, on the beaches. And then she would go out and find it and ride it on the beach. And there were no stables, there were no fences, it was just this really beautiful organic life that my mom had. And they were the only white family on the reservation. And then my father was in timber, and they met out there. And so I think that just that. And then they moved to Seaside, Oregon, where I was born, and that's the end of the Lewis and Clark Trail. And so I always had this lore within me of my ancestry that was like prospectors and rugged pioneers. And but also now, as I get older, I realize that I mean, that's a really nice story. But in reality, there was this naturalization going on with the Native Americans too, that they were sort of kind of a part of. um, and that has resounding effects, right? Those echoes have been resonant in our culture today. And so I think that because my background was one of my ancestors living in this sort of wild, remote places. um I think it's in my ancestral DNA that I sort of love that too.
Mhm.
So here I am out in the outskirts, like we live on the most remote island in Maine. And I'm probably one of the first ones, if not the first one, to see the sunrise in the United States.
Mm.
And we're so far out. And there's just something. I have an enormous love affair for this place, with this place. Um, it's so wild, and it's off the grid, and it's 20 something miles out. And so when I come here to work, and I come here to live in a meditation for 3 months. And I come here to go deep, and I come here to just, you know, observe the patterns of nature, observe the migratory patterns of songbirds and the elements. And you live by the tides here. And every day at high tide, I cold float in a cove. And there's something about this place and painting out here that feeds a kind of synesthetic inclination that I have, which is gathering all the senses and pushing them out into the paint, whether it's olfactory, auditory, the tempo, the rhythms, the music of nature. And so I would say that when I'm here, I am absolutely in my element. And then, cold kicks us out. And, at some point, I want to take a bath and put on some outfits and like be part of civilization
Yeah.
again. And so, we go back into the world, and in a different kind of way. And I'd say that, it's the 3 months here that really is my soul food that sustains me for wherever I go then for the next 8, 9 months. So I don't think the work changes as much, but I think I feel more connected. Maybe my gestures get looser out here. I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but this is like my docking station,
Hmm.
I'd
And
say.
it serves as inspiration for basically the rest of the time until you get to come back, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think when I moved away from the Pacific Northwest and moved to the South, it was a hard decision, and it was one that I instigated because I felt that Bo wasn't in his element there. And I thought, well, first of all, when I moved from the Pacific Northwest, I thought, well, I have the music in me and I paint from an interior source of inspiration. So I can just take that with me wherever I go.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true to a point, but I think I underestimated the challenges of uprooting and moving to a culture that's so vastly different. But I made that, but I really instigated that decision because as a partner to somebody who is such an important painter and so talented, I felt guilty for bringing him out to the Pacific Northwest and sort of into this, into this remote place where figuration in the European tradition really isn't valued. And so I started to witness that, like, I felt like Bo needed to live around more narrative tension.
Mm-hmm.
And the South provides so much narrative tension.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, we kind of have this life where the South is his sort of feeding ground for ideas and um, diversity, narrative tension, just sort of, and then Maine is my source
Mm-hmm.
of inspiration. Um, but it's his source of inspiration too. I won't take that away
Yeah.
from it. Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
because he paints a lot of Maine scenes too.
Yeah, and so what challenges for you have there specifically been with a move like that?
A lot, a lot. I think the South. Well, are you talking about going from the
Yeah.
Northwest to the
Yeah.
South?
Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, in the Pacific Northwest, I was never really aware of being a woman.
Mhm.
I think that I just
Mhm.
was. And I was living fully at my greatest capacity. And then I got to the South and I realized, oh, this is what they're talking about when they use the word patriarchy.
Mhm.
It's in the water.
Mhm.
And so that's a challenge. I think part of the benefits is, I love the warmth. I love the warmth of the people. And there's an emotional intelligence. I think that that's really inherent in the South. And there's a sense of play and there's a sense of buoyancy. And really, I take a lot away from that. I really enjoy that. And storytelling is really entertaining. Southern storytelling is very entertaining. Um, and I love my studio. I have a big studio in an old converted cotton mill, which it's about 3,000 square feet. You know it. You've
Mhm.
been there. You've spent a lot of time there, and I love that studio. And I think that, and then we have a nice house, and it's cozy. It's not like a lavish existence, but it's comfortable, and it's an easy place to live. I think as an artist
Mhm.
because you have a certain amount of economic freedom as well. You don't have those constraints that you'd have in a larger city. And you don't have space constraints. I mean, I think when I moved to the South, I thought, okay, this satisfies that artists, the fact that artists are always starved for light, space, and time.
Mhm.
And it gives me all those things.
Yeah. Yeah, the South is really an interesting place, and I think it's so interesting what you say about like being aware of being a woman, because that's a great way to put it, because the optimal way of living would be not like being aware of your gender, race, etc. Like it sort of should be just the thing that you're not reminded of. But that's interesting to think about, moving and then suddenly having that reminder, and then also like being a painter and having like, because you have your own practice, and like in the kind of tradition of the South, I don't think that's not super common for women to have their own this like singular identity that isn't
That's
isn't
right.
to support the family or to support the husband. um it is kind of like the norm for that to be in the South. So like I can understand how that would bring challenges, especially to someone like you who's a painter and is like totally their own person. um Do you think that challenge, like, other than being this like unpleasant sort of realization that happens when you move, do you think any of it has been like, has there been any benefit to confronting that sort of challenge for you?
Uh, well, it inspired me to curate the show I've been working
Mm.
on. About 4 years ago, I had the idea to curate a show called Women of the Pacific Northwest,
Mm-hmm.
and it is going to open in January in Columbus. And so I am bringing 13. I'm in it as well. I make 14, but I'm bringing 13 stellar uh, works from amazing female artists from the Pacific Northwest
Mm-hmm.
to the Southeast. And I'm really excited to show that story. I'm not saying tell that story. I mean, I wrote a curatorial essay that, sets it in context. But what I mean by show the story or show is because I think what it has allowed me, I think living in the South, I think going back to what I was talking about earlier with my ancestry, the reason I told that story is because I think it's those stories are so fundamental to who we are. And I think the way that my Nana would talk about her life, um, I think she always felt like an outsider wherever she was, out in the reservation. And so I think that it's probably grown within me. I inherently have a pretty high tolerance for being an outsider, and so I think one of the benefits for being an outsider is you just get to be sort of this floating observer in many ways. um, and so one of the things I noticed is just how in living in a culture that's so vastly different from my culture of origin is being able to see how art is appreciated differently. Art looks different. What is recognized as art is very different. And who's recognizing who the viewers are and who's recognizing it, it's very different. I think there's difference, there's a difference in who am I from my roots and how have I been affected by enculturation? We're all affected by enculturation, wherever we go, we're absorbing things and observing and then sometimes embodying, honestly, many ways because of the need for survival and connection and, so anyway, being there kind of with this as kind of this um, well, I used to call it when I moved to the South, I thought, well, I'm going to take myself on an extended anthropology field trip. And I still feel like I'm on an extended anthropology field trip,
Yeah.
but it's gone from 3 years to 11 or 12 years now. I can't believe how long it's been that I've been there, but I still feel like I'm on an extended anthropology field trip. But so it allowed me this sort of, like window into how cultures see art differently and perceive of art differently. And so I thought, what a great idea to take to just take a body of work, um, take the visual language to gather a show of this visual language of a culture that's very remote in the Pacific Northwest. Nobody thinks about it much, and then move it and just kind of share like how we view things, because I think particularly now as our country talks about being so siloed, and um it's a way of not taking a silo but just sharing the different ways that we process information, the different ways that we create, the different sort of lenses that we wear. So I think that, living as an outsider somewhere has allowed me to, yeah, have that inspiration to do things like that.
Yeah, I think, and that's also so valuable to the area where you are, because that's, it wouldn't happen in Columbus, Georgia, that you can bring that work and show it to those people, and that sort of incites change. Tell me about the show a little bit more, like your curatorial process, and the title of it too. I don't think you mentioned it.
It's called Women of
Oh,
the
okay.
Pacific Northwest.
Okay, cool.
And it's 14 women, and it's And I would say there's a heavy emphasis. Well, it's about how the base of the show is how environment affects us, whether it's in natural environment, spiritual environment, cultural environment, how it affects and how it informs work, the creative process. And there's a big emphasis on material
Mhm.
exploration. So I think, and one of the arguments I make in my essay is I talk about my theory of how the Pacific Northwest aesthetic came to be, and through historical accounts. But also there's an inventive, pioneering quality to that part of the country,
Mhm.
and so I a lot of artists are exploring media, not just paint, but there's a lot of sculptural elements, there's some installation elements, there's painting. So it's a very diverse kind of medium show.
Mhm.
And it opens in January, and I think I'm hoping it travels.
Mhm.
We have one possibility for it to travel.
Wonderful.
And then my goal is I hope that a lot of these artists will come down to the South and we'll do a panel discussion.
Oh, I would love to go to that. So when
Yeah.
the opening will be in January of 2025.
Well, the show opens January 25. I think we need a couple weeks to install it, and some artists are going to be flying in to install their works as well. And one I think is going to work with students.
Mhm.
One of the things that one of the things I'd like to see is that when the artists come to visit, that the students have access to work with them, or their studio visits or crits, and so I'm hoping that we'll have some exchange with the art department in that way. And the show will go up and open January 11th, I think is the date now, but I think the reception will be a little bit later
Mhm.
because I'll be out of town for a little bit and I'll come back, and I'm hoping the reception will be in February.
Okay, and it will be at the Bo Bartlett Center in Columbus, Georgia.
That's right.
Great. Well, I'm gonna put that. I'll put the month of January on my calendar just to have that on
I'll
my
let you know.
radar.
I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, but I'd love to go to the panel. That would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so about your work, because you are such an incredible painter, and you like there's so much I love about your work, but just to kind of start, you paint mostly on canvas. So tell me just like a little bit about your painting. You work with encaustic. Um, what do you love about the material? And a little bit more just in general about your paintings.
I started working in this material so long ago that it has turned into my language,
Mhm.
and or at least I'd say it's a vehicle for translating my language.
Mhm.
And um, I would say that I was first exposed to this medium when I was studying Greco-Roman Egyptian art history in college. And then the fan portraits are they're the first recorded use of this medium. And I think I gravitated slowly toward this medium, and I did this just trial and error. There was nobody to teach me, but I got some books on materials and solutions and recipes, and I started playing with those, and then I kept exploring until I found a medium that worked for me. And I really am not a purist when it comes to working in encaustic, because I break a lot of rules, and I my process is very different than I think most. Um, but I would say that the reason that material continues to speak to me is because it translates what I'm trying to paint, which is, and I riff off this because I think Mark Rothko said it, but he said, I want to paint the place where music lives. And I want to paint the place where I do paint the place where music lives. And I think because I'm painting um, fields of energy in a way that are lyrical, naturalistic um, gestures, um, and accumulations and weather patterns and movement. Um, I think that I'm painting from this sort of cosmic pathos. And I think that that material allows me the illusion of depth and resonance that I'm after while tapping that cosmic pathos
Mhm.
and tapping music. Yeah.
Yeah. And what so you have this, like, it's a really physical material, and um how does that inform, like, the actual work at all, because there is a lot of physical strength and movement that has to be involved in operating the material, and just even like the practical side of it. So how do you think that challenges the work at all?
It does challenge the work because there are ways that there are effects that I want to get that I have to break a lot of rules and encaustic doesn't necessarily want to give me.
Mhm.
So I have to work fast and I have to work with large gestures. So and it's heavy and because I'm working on rigid panel
Mhm.
and it goes from I'm working from horizontal surface to vertical surface, so it goes back and forth. So I have to stay really strong and kind of have to know what you're doing. But the beauty of the material is that there is this sort of element of chance as well. And not well, I think I've been doing it so long that I'm not sure. I think chance diminishes over time because
Mhm.
it has a little predict. My experience, creates a little predictability in it, but it's a the thing about the material is it's very unforgiving.
Mhm.
So I say it's a lot like watercolor in that when you lay down something, you can't just take it off. Like if I get the underpainting wrong, then there's no saving it. Um, because I'm working with transparencies, and I often kind of equate my process to the idea of like it's like stacking snowflakes.
Mhm.
It's just one delicate layer after another delicate layer after another delicate layer. um, and so it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of planning to sort of conceive of what's going to get buried and what do you want to bring to the fore in terms of painting these illusions of deep space.
Mhm. And so just to go back a little bit, your work, you have such a unique visual language in that you've created through this process, and I've seen your work sort of change just over years. When I first saw kind of like the early works, that were in encaustic, they were quite different than the work you do now. And so it over years you've developed like a very strong visual language that's uniquely yours, but as equally creative. And so what how do you, if you had to verbalize the process, which I know it's like it's a difficult thing to do, but if you had to verbalize the process of how you found that visual language that's so authentic and unique to you, how would you say you navigated that process? Because for me, it's very interesting when artists working in abstraction can do that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it goes back to I think we have to stay open to what ifs.
Mhm.
And this is where I think technology is problematic because if we're on the screen and we're looking at what everybody likes,
Mhm.
we're not inventing and we're not and so I'm kind of, thank God I think I came along without social media and without technology because it allowed me to be in the world in a way where my senses were very receptive. I think I was born with some peculiar qualities, and one of them is I'm I have hyperosmia, which is that I have this intense sense of smell. I can smell
Oh.
everything, and it's like it's a superpower, but it's such a burden sometimes because, well, you can see why. And so I have this hyper asthmatic quality, and then I also have this keen sense of mimicry, and I think it comes from music. I don't know, from when I was a kid, I could just pick something up, play it on the piano, and then, or, I can do voices, I can do bird calls, and I have this sort of eagle eye in nature too, where I can spot something. Um, like yesterday, we're walking the rocks, and I'm like, oh, there's the baby heron. We have this baby
Mhm.
heron that's on the island, and it's down in this crevice of the rocks. And, I just had this super keen sensory like reception. It's really bizarre. And so I think that all of those qualities allowed me to be in the world and then notice what resonated.
Mhm.
Like, oh, that resonates. Oh, that resonates. And so I think it's a cumulative process, and it's a very unconscious process, developing one's language, visual language. Um, but I would say things like, what did I love? Like Asian landscape paintings.
Mhm.
I loved that. Um, I came along in a place of the Pacific Northwest that valued the works, and I was exposed to the works of the Northwest Masters, which were considered Mark Rothko. I mean, sorry, no, Mark Tobey, Morris Graves, Kenneth Callahan, Guy Anderson, Paul Horiuchi, and those guys were all influenced by sort of this Asian Buddhist Japanese Zen placement, sort of down palette. And so I was exposed to that pretty early. And then, and I think part of what you're saying about how my work has changed over the years, and how has my move changed the work, it was very, very influenced by the Pacific Northwest's Asian influence and Pacific Northwest modernism, which is very elemental,
Mhm.
and indigenous totemic aesthetics. And then as I sort of evolved, as the work evolved, I think that Asian influence also gave way to European influence. And so, then I started to look at the works of like Corot. And I looked at, oh, what I love about Corot, it's not the person in the landscape, it's not the bucolic nature of that shack or whatever,
Mhm.
cottage. It's the leaves on the trees and how they seem to just sort of quaver. And, it's like, oh, that excites me.
Mhm.
And then being out here on the island, what excites me? It's the point where the elements meet. It's the water, where the fluidity of the water, that element meets the hard granite
Mhm.
ledge. And then you have that combustion. And it's the energy in that threshold that excites me. And so that's what I paint about.
Mhm.
And so I think that as people are developing their visual language, it's about staying open to the what ifs and being super open to the natural world, and also are open to other artists. Like, oh, how are they solving that problem? Ooh, that kind of turns me on. Oh, I wonder if I did that. But within my own language.
Mhm.
And I think that so that's, I think, maybe a short a short answer to that, how I developed my language, because again, it's very unconscious. And then also, I'm a musician, so I started playing piano when I was 5, and I have a classical music practice, and then the last 4, 5, 6 years have been really deep into theory and improvisation, and so that morphs the paintings as well. I feel like we have to be really open on all of our channels,
Mhm.
and then the work evolves, and the language, the visual vocabulary evolves organically. But you have to stay true to it too.
Yeah, that makes me think that, even though we're talking about painting and something that people experience visually, it's actually interesting to think that to be a good painter, you actually have to embrace those other senses and also experiences. And it's kind of like painting. I mean, I think it's easy to be like, oh, I want to be a painter, I want to paint, so I should look at other paintings. And that's kind of so limited, because I do agree with you that in order to develop that really personal style and language, you kind of have to personally experience these things that are not just visual, and that's kind of, or not just like a purely visual experience, but all of these other experiences, like how you mentioned music and how you mentioned just sort of being in those environments, how that feeds that thing that you make, that visual painting, and results in that kind of unique language. It's an interesting, I think it's just an interesting thing to realize as a painter, and I don't think that's immediately obvious.
Huh. Um, well, I think that every painting is a
Yeah,
self-portrait
that's true too. Yeah.
of the artist's life lived.
Yeah.
And the self is, what is the self? The self is just an accumulation of experiences, observations, curiosities, self-education, relationships, connections, how it's the whole thing. And then every I think every work of art is a self-portrait of the person of the life behind who made it.
Mhm.
So, and I think that also makes a difference in, like work that's really alive because you can feel the energy of the artist behind it
Mhm.
versus work that doesn't have that quality.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to put your finger on what exactly that is. There's like a truthfulness to it that you can sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
versus,
Authenticity.
yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about how music is an inspiration to your painting practice, or how they feed each other.
I spend way too much time on the piano. It's just, yeah, I can be there hours. It's like, okay, yeah, these paintings aren't going to paint themselves. I better go do that too. Um, no, I love both things, but it really does inform it. I go back and forth. It's sort of like, I mean, it's a world, right? It's this world that it's not static. Um, it has crests and valleys. It has climaxes and rests. It has color. It has it has compassion. It has angst. It has playfulness. It has all of it. And so to channel that, it's such a gift. And like if I'm around a lot of people, I'm sort of an extroverted introvert. If I'm around a lot of people, then my palate cleanser, or as they call it in restaurants, my amuse bouche, is my piano. So if I'm around a lot of people and then I just want to recenter and get back to my painting practice, I have to sit at the piano first. It's like it calms my nervous system.
Mhm.
Um, it's like a meditation. It's like living in a meditation. And also, I think piano for me, it's endless puzzling. There are so many problems to solve. There are endless scores to devour in the history of music, and so, I always have a couple pieces going on that I'm working on, and I think in that because starting in that practice at such a young age taught me how to go deep, go long, go focused, go committed to one single piece of creativity.
Mhm.
I think now with everything being in these, like, I don't know if our culture now, well, no, I do know our culture doesn't really reward the going deep and long and sitting with something for a really long time,
Mhm.
um, to create something.
Mhm. That's, yeah, it's an interesting point about that, and it's, I guess it is something you kind of have to take on in order to achieve kind of like a greater purpose. Um, and
And I think I also think that it's a great lesson in that, no endeavor, when you first start the endeavor, you're not good at it.
Mhm.
It's like it's methodical to work your way through it, the cognitive process of it, and then gaining the muscle memory of it. And then, like I've talked to a lot of people who've said, "Oh, I wanted to be an artist
Mm.
when I was young," but I realized in art school or high school, I wasn't good at it. or I had a teacher who told me I wasn't good at it. I hear that a lot, sadly. Or I realized I didn't have anything to say. And then they quickly sort of jumped that track and went to something else. Um, but it kind of doesn't work that way. I mean, I think it's a really long, slow build.
Yeah, that is also the idea of I'm not good at it. It's like you could never know if you're good at art because it is such a vast thing that, people might practice something very simple and elementary that's considered, kind of like the building block of art class, like, painting, I don't know, something right in front of you. And maybe if you're a person who doesn't like with who acrylic paint doesn't resonate with, you might automatically kind of throw that out and not really go deeper into exploring materials or subject matter or things of that nature. And it's just so silly to say like I thought I liked art, but I kind of tried it for this one class and it didn't work out, or someone told me I wasn't good at it. It's like you could never know. Like you're not even dipping your toe into art by just taking an art class and
Yeah.
deciding you're not good at it, right? Because it's like so much greater than that. And but I think your work is so strong, probably because you have all of these different things that feed your painting practice, and it's like music, and then you also have this experience with filmmaking too, which is another thing I wanted to ask you about. That you worked on several films, and first of all, what was your favorite to work on? Do you have a
Mm.
favorite?
Yeah, I think C was a lot of fun
Yeah.
because it was so unscripted and impromptu.
Hmm.
And we just got massive footage, and I think C really taps the sensory world, so that's my playground. And I'm not a storyteller, and my work's not story driven,
Right.
so but so I loved sort of the playfulness of C. And then we had these amazing editors who like who took all of this footage and then synthesized it into this piece that I think I really like that movie. um and then Things Don't Stay Fixed was really Bo's brainchild, and he that was kind of a major endeavor, feature length and everything, and he so he was the director and really in charge of that. I played around with making some music for that, very simple improvisational music for that movie. And then Helga was a film that it's a short film about Helga Tesdorf, and that was really my idea, because our background is that Bo was really close friends with Andrew Wyeth, the painter, and Helga Tesdorf has continued to be a friend of ours after Andy's passing, and the four of us used to get together a lot, and we just we really miss that friendship, all four of us. But after Andy passed away, Helga would call Bo and say, Bo, I don't, all these reporters are calling me and writers are calling me, and they want me to tell my story, but I don't want to tell them my story. I want to tell you my story because I trust you. And Bo thought, God, that's a big responsibility, maybe. And so it kind of sat there for a few years. And I just said, Bo, I want to make this film. We need to get this story down, because there's and so that was really my brainchild, that film. And so then we got Jesse Brass, who's a terrific filmmaker, and he did a lot of the heavy lifting because he filmed it. He was the cinematographer and then edited as well, and Bo directed, and I think that was a successful little poetic piece that allowed Helga to tell her story, although she still remains very cryptic about her story.
Mhm.
Um, she speaks in haikus, and so yeah. So I think that I've played my part in films in various ways. The thing about filmmaking, though, is it's a huge enterprise. And when you're dealing with cast and crew and budgets and exposures and liabilities, what I realized in Things Don't Stay Fixes, there are a few creative roles that people can play. One, of course, the most creative is the director. Acting is very creative. And then I think the music, kind of have this, like, I sort of wish sometimes that I had pursued a career in making music for, films, like film scores and stuff. And I was talking to this musician who does that, and we were sitting in Connecticut once, and I said, "Oh, I've always wanted to I always wanted to have that career." And he goes, "Yeah, me too," jokingly, because those positions are really going away. Like,
Mhm.
there are just very few of those positions for people anymore in filmmaking. But so anyway, what I learned in the process of filmmaking is the improvisational one of C was a lot of fun. But when you're making like a major film with cast and crew, yeah, like I said, there are a few creative positions, and then the rest is just a lot of heavy lifting
Mhm.
and a lot of kind of structural minded stuff, and 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 non-creative stuff, I would say.
Mhm. Yeah, the reason I ask you about your experience in filmmaking is partly because I do think that when you watch a film as someone who's observing it, I feel like there's really this way that films can sort of show the truth in a this authentic way, that it's hard to put your finger on, but I feel like you can really make a lot of creative decisions that really tell a story even without having a structured narrative, if that makes sense. So I
Yeah.
kind of I think that's very interesting, especially for someone who's predominantly a painter to approach, because I wonder how those similarities can kind of feed off of each other. Like when I mean, I've never had any kind of experience that deeply in that way of creating art and filmmaking, but as someone who has, and you've had like a decent amount of experience, you and Bo, doing that, it seems like there are these parallels that you capture these things in video that what they say, a photo or a picture is 1,000 words. You can just do that over and over again with film, and so it's like a powerful instrument. um
Mhm.
so many moving parts, and of course it's so different with acting, like you said, with acting versus something that's more improvisational and personal, where I would imagine you have more creative control when it's just kind of you and Bo, and then of course there's the editor, but it that kind of puts together the whole thing. But yeah, it's an interesting way to tell a story and be really and kind of explore that creation of a visual language, if that makes sense, that I would imagine would feed your other practices a lot.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
I think filmmaking at its best is the most synesthetic art form you can do.
Mhm.
And sorry, I just realized I have a lot of ceiling showing. I don't know why I set it up that way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I think it's the most synesthetic art form you can do, really. You're marrying the visual and the musical,
Mhm.
and it can be so beautiful. Filmmaking is very hard. It's hard to make a good movie. I love I think, my favorite movies this year, one of my favorite movies was the Wim Wenders film called The Perfect Days.
Mm.
Perfect Days. And then also Past Lives was another of my favorite, because they're so subtle. But Perfect Days really, because it's about living life as a deciding to live life as a
Mm.
meditation, and to take in to live in such a way that you can take in uh, and feel gratitude with the smallest acts. And so I prefer these really quiet
Yeah.
films, um, because they tap the nature of human existence.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah. Um, there's a so this is actually an interesting. I had this question written out for you, and I feel like it's a great question with all of the kind of art forms we talked about. But I love the message on your website. First of all, I think there's so much good writing on your website, and I
Oh,
don't know, if a lot of people kind of know that, but I love the messages on your website, and you're a wonderful writer too. You're a great writer.
oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Um,
It's funny. I stopped doing those as Instagram sort of took over
mm.
because, yeah, I used to do Tumblr posts too that were cool.
Oh,
And yeah,
nice.
and then Instagram is just sort of like you sort of like disperse it out in these tiny little crumbs that are not as succinct. And anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Yes.
you.
I was reading. I was kind of referencing your website first of all, and then I kind of got into the messages, and this is became like a little bit of a rabbit hole. But I love them, and you, in one of your messages about beauty, which was such a great read, you said, as an artist, I often wonder about the universal language of beauty. Are there common qualities that every individual on this earth would say that is awesome and beautiful? So, do you think, what would those elements be if you could
God,
answer that question?
that's such a good, God, that's such a good question to come back to because that was a while ago. And I think I can remember what book I was reading while I wrote that. It was John O'Donohue.
Mm-hmm.
He's so amazing. He passed away sadly, but his book about beauty, and it's just such a great read. But I don't know anymore, Marina. I mean, I think I used to think that I knew that. I don't know anymore. Because
I don't think I ever knew or could know. That's why I'm asking you.
yeah, yeah, I thought, well, certainly everybody would look at, an element of nature, or like what I was talking about with the elements crashing of at the thresholds, like, certainly everyone would agree that that's beautiful. But the more travel I've done and the more travel I've done and the more I've lived in, these different, now that I live in this other part of the world, the country, I mean, I don't really know because I think about music and I think about the Western canon. And really, the Western canon is made up of, well, it's the evolution of what's come to be like expected cadences. And one note next to the next note and its relationship, and is that pleasing or not? And how the golden ratio comes into play with Western storytelling, movies, um, paintings on a good day,
Mm-hmm.
and and so we have these, and then and within narrative story arcs, there is also that golden ratio that's implicit in Western, and in Western music. There's the climax at the golden ratio point, and then you get into resolution coda and all that. And so I don't know, because then you look at Western canon and what our ears have been attuned to find beautiful and pleasing. And then you look at Indian raga music, which is a completely different language. And there is no sort of climax and resolution. It's what I would call, which was introduced to me in studying Baroque music, kind of this forward spinning where everything is just, but there's not, it's like this constant droning rhythm. And then you have gamelan, which is a totally different language as well. And so culture to culture, I think we're gonna hear beauty differently because of what we've been enculturated toward.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if visually there is a universal thing we can all agree on about what's beautiful. Like, for example, I did this project where I was asked, and I think you know this because you were in my studio around the same time, where I was asked by the State Department to go to Papua New Guinea
Mm-hmm.
to do this, to be a visiting artist for the Art in Embassies program. And so I went there, and my job was to teach. They wanted me to teach my practice to a number of female artists, and really the idea was that where they were taking me was the number one place in the world for violence against women. And so they were trying to demonstrate female empowerment. And so as I was there working with these women, and then there were also men in the classes as well. But that was just this really fascinating project, and it was challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I realized, I'm there, and it's such the conditions are so rough, and they're subsisting, and there's just immense poverty, and their islands are getting extracted for natural gas and precious metals, and the unemployment rate's like 90% or something, and the poverty is just like overwhelming, and there's trash everywhere because there's just kind of no systems in place to sort of handle um, all of it. And I realized that here I am of like reverence of nature, like, oh my God, can we all agree that the sunset is beautiful? Can we all just agree that the water is so beautiful? And maybe not, because maybe nature to another culture
Mm-hmm.
is the sea levels are rising,
Mm-hmm.
our island is drowning, and we have nowhere to go. And I don't find that water beautiful. And, I mean, like, I think that I've come to realize that I have a very maybe privileged, I come from a very privileged lens of like beholding nature as
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. It's the source for poetry, it's the source for music, it's the source for painting, it's the source for beauty. It's this like mother source. But then maybe other cultures would not look at it the same way. I don't know if a farmer would look at it the same way.
That's such a good
Or
point, because it kind of shows how, if you are from a place where you go to the water, and that's kind of like a place where you find beauty because it's a place of relaxation and it's not an immediate threat. It's beautiful to you, but like exactly as you mentioned, if you are someone who lives on an island who's threatened by nature, then maybe their beauty would be in something that they consider safe, which could be a room, like even just a room with four walls that we might think is depressing because it's this confined space. Someone from a place like that might be like, no, that would be my greatest joy and my beauty, because that's what I don't have. That. So it's interesting. It's kind of maybe like what you lack, or the safety that you look for.
yeah, yeah. I also think beauty is it can be beheld by our capacity
Mm-hmm.
to comprehend it too. I was on an airplane once. We were traveling around the world, and we were leaving Nepal, and there are all these migrant workers that were being. It was really bizarre. All these workers, young Nepalese men, who were being hired to go work, and I think we were on our way to Jordan, and was it Jordan? Yeah, we were having a stopover in Jordan, and they were being, just like there were like 50 of them on the plane, and they were all getting moved to Jordan to I think it seemed like manual labor or something. And then so Bo and I were sitting, and then sitting on the plane, and one of the guys was sitting next to me, and we were flying over the Himalayas, and there was Mount Everest, and we're like, oh my God, look at this. And we were just astounded by the magnificence of the Himalayas and Mount Everest. And the guy next to me just sat, just sort of frozen cold, and he sort of looked straight ahead. It's like I don't it, it's like you can't behold the beauty of Everest if you can't even conceive that you're in the air looking at
Mm-hmm.
Everest, in a
Exactly.
way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Um, it's it's true how people might not even maybe realize sometimes that it is totally with how wide that capacity is. And I guess maybe it comes from a sense of curiosity. If you don't have curiosity, there's no way you can absorb what you see in front of you, and you can't even distinguish if it's something that's really profound and beautiful. It is kind of,
Yeah.
I think especially in America, and even, I don't know if so much in the South or not, but this kind of um, sort of resolution is important to people in a way, like whatever it is
Mm.
that they're absorbing, whether it's visual art, whether it's like, let's say painting or music or even a film. It seems like people really value this point of resolution, this conclusion, and they kind of gauge the importance of something by that, by how well was it
I'm so
resolved.
glad you I'm so glad you brought that
Yeah.
up because I 100% agree.
Hmm.
Increasingly so. I remember I was listening to an interview with a writer, I can't remember, it was a famous author, and he said that so often people say, "Okay, what character was this person in your story? Was that your wife? What character was this? And who are you in this story?" And he said, "People are losing the capacity to just experience fiction. Like, not all of everything has to be a memoir."
Hmm. Yeah, it's
And I think that
yeah.
dovetails with what you said.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's so important in fiction too, because there's there's a formula that comes along with that, with achieving that sense of completion and resolution in whatever medium. Um, so, and I think that formula that's sometimes required is the problem, right? Like when something is based on a formula, you kind of take out this possibility of chance or uh, things that could be, if that makes sense. So to me, it's kind of interesting, and I do think like kind of the US, and I don't know, maybe other places too, but it seems to me like here it's very important to have that beginning end, or beginning middle end. And I think, as someone who I practice abstract painting, um, you know, that's mostly what I do. So I think about that in the context of abstraction. And it, a lot of times, abstraction isn't going to have that defined narrative or that kind of really tangible thing that sometimes maybe people look for. And I think it's sort of interesting that people, when they look at art, and they're looking for that, hey, what is that, what does it mean, kind of thing, and it's like if you don't provide them that, they gauge that as not successful, not enough, not fulfilling enough. So yeah, as an abstract artist, it's, I think, a very interesting thing to consider.
Yep.
Hmm. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yes, and I can't tell you how many studio visits I've had where people just sort of don't get it, and that's okay. I think everyone our brains are wired differently too. Not everybody has the sensory attunement, and they're more in their heads.
mhm,
And that you just have to sort of understand that we all process information differently. Well, I don't know if it's information. We just process things differently, all of us, one to the next.
mhm. um so how, I kind of want to ask you this because it seems like we talked about so many like creative endeavors that you're involved in. And so how do you balance the practicality of art making and like finding, because I know you mentioned, I think it was in a previous interview, how career and art making are separate. And so it to me, that kind of is like the
Mm.
practical versus the creative and balancing those things. So how do you do that?
So I'm curious, and I want to ask you a
Yeah.
question. When you say career, I'm just wondering what elements of that are you thinking
So,
about?
I mean, the way that I would describe it is, you know, if we wanted to just make art, we don't really have to do anything but that. So, there would be no necessarily social elements or, kind of responsibilities, or even things like keeping up with a website, or, going to show
Mm.
openings, or, these these things you kind of have to, you could just be a total recluse, which would be like, I kind of would love that if I could just do, um
You have a good setup for it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so do you in Maine, and so
Yes,
it's kind of
indeed.
it's like, would you do anything else if you didn't have to do any of that, if it was just, I just want to make art? And also, I think part of that is giving yourself room to just make things that could be total fails. Like when you
Yeah.
approach, like in terms of a career, even that could come down to, I'm making paintings that I know will be successful, or I'm making whatever work it is that you're making. I know that this will be successful. This will go here, will exhibit here. Like that's kind of career, right? And so I think of art making from that place too. A lot of the time, it's like I'm making this painting. This painting will go here. I know this will be a successful work because it's sort of something I've done a lot. And that's kind of the practical element. Now, if I could just mess around and kind of see what happens and just not having that end result expectation of that end result. I think career is something that has to be more structured. So I think, especially someone who makes art full time, how do you balance those two things?
I think I look at career as the sum of many parts, or the sum of a lot of decisions made over the course of a lifetime. And I don't know how conscious I am of it, or it might be an unconscious thing, but, some of the things you were saying about career, it reminds me of just this battle that just wants to continue raging in me, which is about, invention versus continuity or invention.
Mm-hmm.
And what will the audience say? What will, these stupid voices?
Mm-hmm.
When really, I spend the majority of my time making work. And then I touch base with my dealers from time to time, and hang out with my friends and go to openings. And I mean, to me, it's this really organic, it's just really organic to also making the paintings, because it's an orbit of people whose language, we all speak a similar language, and we're in this enterprise together. And then the odd thing about the enterprise of being an artist is that it requires a lot of time alone
Mm-hmm.
as a painter, and I love that, and I thrive on that. But I wouldn't want that solely. I mean, I want my work to have a purpose in the world. I want the work to touch people's experience, and to, hopefully make people feel a sense of awe or mystery. And I think that, I do it as a mode of communication. So I think, the career thing, it's like, I don't think just painting is a one way delivery system.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's reciprocity with it, and there's a reciprocity implicit in the whole system. And then in terms of, shows and all that, I've been making some pretty conscious decisions lately to slow down my show schedule, um, because my paintings take longer,
Mm-hmm.
and as I get older, I want to have less stress around show deadlines. And so I'm giving myself one show a year. There was a time a few years ago where I had 3 shows in a calendar year, and I was not a happy person. I just was always stressed that I was behind. And I hate that feeling of feeling behind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, for me, I think like career is also the realities of time budgeting. And if I say, yeah, and what you say yes to and what you say no to. Um, and I want to work with nice people.
Mm-hmm.
And I do get to work with nice people, and I feel super lucky. It's on my gratitudes list, really, just getting to work with really amazing people. Yeah. And I think I look at dealers and artists and whoever, as this orbit of expanding circle of friendship. I don't have an agenda with any of them. It's an expansive circle of friendship, and how lucky are we? And then, the reality is, yes, you have to make really smart decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You do.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to manage the time in a way that I guess kind of facilitates the practical and the creative in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to ask you one more thing, actually, because I think this is a really interesting question. And I know I've had you for like an hour, so I don't want to take too much of your time. But I am interested, I'm very interested in how artists are navigating the current landscape of technology. Like, it sounds like you're not
Mhm.
maybe super fond of it, like in terms of social media and stuff. But actually, beyond that, like especially now with the rise of AI, and a lot of artists talk about how there are a lot of threats with that in terms of the kind of keeping your work yours and what's original and what won't be. And I'm interested in the things that kind of um, artists find to be a little bit scary, but also I'm interested in ways that maybe artists can use that technology to their benefit.
Mhm. Mhm. I don't know. I don't have any answers for that because I don't engage with AI. I just don't. I just haven't been really curious about it. I don't. I try to. I'm not against technology. I think it can make our lives pretty amazing because look what we're doing right now.
Mhm.
And um, and I think social media is good because it allows a community of friendship really among artists, and we don't all have to live like in the same building and even the same city. And I think like I think it keeps connections alive, and it's really important. We have to use it wisely, though. So in using it to keep our relationships connected, that bodes well for not feeling isolated, but then having um, a kind of a bottomless need for this dopamine rush that can feel isolating. So, it's a double-edged thing. AI, I'm excited for certain aspects of AI. I mean, if it can cure cancer, if it can, if it can solve some scientific problems, if it can shed insight that we can't as humans, I think it's really exciting. Um, I was reading where through AI can hear a pitch or a range that we can't hear, and it had detected that when baby turtles hatch under the sand, and they follow the moonlight to the ocean, their mothers are in the ocean calling for them, and they can hear them.
Mm,
They're like singing to them,
interesting.
and AI was able to pick up that frequency or whatever. So I think that there are some really like splendorous things that AI is going to be able to show us. Um, you know, there are a lot of like memes and stuff of like I don't know, like a cat head on a human body doing stuff, and people laugh about it. I mean, like I don't know, like that's fine and everything. I just don't like jam with that. That's just not my jam. Like I'm glad it's fun for people, but I don't know. So I think that it kind of AI is it falls along the lines of what I say is just because you can doesn't always mean you should.
Mm, that's interesting.
So we'll see where it goes. We'll see where it goes. I hope it's useful in many ways. But I see it also as similar to nuclear physics. It could either feed the world or it can destroy the world,
Hmm.
and it's going to be really dependent upon the hands and the intentions. Well, the intentions of its accumulated knowledge, I guess.
Hmm. That's what I find really fascinating about it, is that for it to exist, it has to have this super extensive catalog of data that it really could not have had without years of the internet being in existence. So to me, that's um, kind of the part that piques my interest in it, is that there's just this huge wide information of data, and it's kind of like a culmination of all that data. And so, like, what does that say about the world? it could say a lot of interesting things about the world, and
Mhm.
it can summarize those things really quickly, and it's also kind of like a mirror of our existence, at least during the age of the internet, because that's all it knows. So it's kind of limited in its knowledge, but also extremely powerful. So that's a dichotomy that is like fun to explore, I think.
I think humans, we all have blind spots, all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And AI maybe doesn't have the same blind spots because it's not sentient and it doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. So I think because it's not sentient and it doesn't have consciousness, um, I don't see it as much of a threat to the kind of work I do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but what I you know but what I do think has changed the position and the value of art in our society has just been screens in general, and the availability and the easy digestion. People can just sort of digest images so easily and quickly, and they become sort of
Mm-hmm.
disposable, like swipe saw that. um, and so I worry more about honestly poetry staying alive in our culture. And I don't mean just like the prose and poetry of books, but and poetry per se, but I mean like poetic inferences, poetic existences, poetic references, just living a poetic life,
Mm-hmm.
because technology puts everything as like the neck up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that.
And I also think screens have changed the way we look at work. Like, you have to stand in front of one of my paintings to
Mm-hmm.
really feel it,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so based on material and an implication of depth of resonant surface. And the screen flattens it so much. And so I think that people are getting attuned to seeing things flat, and then they're expecting things to be flat. So I think the screen is changing the way we see and appreciate.
Yeah, I see your work is so powerful in person, and it's hard to. I think maybe after you see your work and then you look at it on a screen, maybe you can have like a better level of understanding of what that really is. But never seeing your work in person and only on a screen, I see definitely a limitation, because I remember when I first saw your work in person and I was able to get really close to it. I mean, I was amazed, and it was stunning with how you create that space. And there's no way a photo can represent it. So I agree. And I think there's probably a lot of art that way. I mean,
Yeah.
lots of
Yeah.
work, even just kind of the way the light hits the brush strokes and just, just regular paintings. It's very important.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I think physical objects hold energy.
Hmm.
And I hope that we can, as a culture, continue to appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree.
How about you? Are you playing with AI?
I am, but not in any capacity that I could say is serious. I think it's very interesting. I mean, the most powerful AI that's out there are language models. So, like, the visual AI is absolutely elementary right now. It's almost laughable at how bad it is. So, I mean, I do think it'll get better, but the language models are the strongest. And actually, it is informative if you play around with it enough, how it really lacks that human element. It's very good at all the things, grammar, constructing a sentence, putting together paragraphs. It's very good at these things. But if you ask it to write a story, or if you ask it to write even a short essay, um, it is so unhuman that it actually makes me wonder where does that humanity lie in writing, because I can certainly read something written by a person who knows how to write and is very good at writing. I can read that versus, AI making something on the same topic, and it's instant. It's like, this is clearly machine generated, and it's less even if it were talking about the exact same things, I feel way less connection. So then it kind of gets me to ask, where does that humanity lie in a sentence? And I think it lies in that really subtle nuance.
Mm.
Like if you read a good book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, like I love fiction. So if you read a really strong piece of fiction, there are these just very small, nuanced ways of constructing a sentence or just using specific words
Mhm.
that can really
Mhm.
kind of hit the nail on the head. And it's like, yeah, but then AI could never do that. And it's not because it lacks intelligence. It's because it lacks something else. That something else is interesting to me. In terms of visual, I haven't seen anything really strong. I mean, I haven't tried Midjourney, which I think is probably the thing to try if you're really interested in visual.
It has a hard time with
Yeah,
hands like the rest of us.
exactly. It has a hard time with such things that you would think would be simple for it, but it's it visually it's just so weak that, and of course it could improve. I mean, its rate of improvement has been very impressive. So,
Yeah.
but I do think that things like painting, I mean, I yeah, that energy in a painting, I don't think can be replicated by a machine, even if it could 3D print a painting. I still don't think so. Um, but it's I actually think prompt engineering for AI will become a legitimate talent, because it will require someone who understands AI in a way that's way greater than the average person, and knows how to work it. So I think that would be a really interesting field actually for artists. Just
Hmm. Interesting.
prompt engineering it to do something in a way that is creative and authentic. And I do think that will be a really interesting field for writers and artists and even filmmakers. But
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
did try to upload images to a program and ask it to generate an image based on uploaded images, which is kind of like the most simplistic elementary thing you can do with like with that, and it didn't do a very good job. So
Did you say in the style of a certain artist?
I just uploaded a bunch of my images, and I wanted it to
Yeah.
I said make an image in the same way of these images, and it actually makes like a caricature of
Hmm.
what it thinks, especially, if you say make abstract work or whatever, makes a caricature of what, you know, something that has no idea about what abstract painting is thinks an abstract painting would be. So, and then it lacks that human quality, which again is what I find to be kind of the lack of it
Mhm.
interesting, because then you're like, wait, what is it exactly that it's missing? It's not the brushstroke because it has the brushstroke. It's not the paint drip because it has the paint drip. It's not the light source because it has the light source. So what is it then? Right? Does that make sense?
Mhm. That's why artists will always have job security.
Yeah, hopefully. Um,
Whether or not people appreciate it and support it is a whole nother thing, but we're gonna keep doing what we do.
yeah, I mean, it kind of ties into that thing we were talking about, in that you have to have kind of to appreciate beauty, you kind of have to be super curious and open yourself up to these things. And so, maybe if I don't open myself up to experimenting with AI, I would never be able to appreciate an artist working in AI, which now I will be able to, because I know that it's actually not that easy to create a digital image. And I think probably the most
Yeah.
underappreciated art is digital art, because like by the general public, because I think the general public and even maybe many artists don't see digital art as impressive as something handmade. And I actually think the opposite. I think digital art is just as hard because it's not easy to get machines to do what you want.
Yeah, I love Leo Villarreal, and then there's that I think he used AI, the artist used AI, that big projection at MoMA right now that's been up for a while, where the artist took an accumulation of all the, like a
Oh,
large.
in the lobby, Rafik
Mhm.
and it all.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. It's mesmerizing. I mean, I'll stand in front of that thing forever, So I think there's a lot of digital art that can be really beautiful and immersive.
Did you read the review by Jerry Saltz of that work? He didn't like it.
Can't
He
remember.
didn't like it.
Yeah.
No, I remember when that first was shown to the public, and of course, like, it is very beautiful, and I think it's very cool. But yeah, he didn't like it, and was very against it. He said it looks like a lava lamp. And
Jerry,
I know,
exactly.
and I disagree, because I think even if you're not interested in that visually, I do think it resonates with a lot of people, and I think that's what we want art to do. We want it to resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, it's very accessible,
Yes.
right? And it's, big color, and it's forever moving, and so it draws you in.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, there's room for everything.
Yeah. I just thought that was an interesting perspective. I don't agree with it, but I thought it was an interesting perspective.
Lava lamp is so funny. Or a mood ring. I had this idea once that, like, do you remember mood rings?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. I had this idea once of, like, an artist could like, for an art piece, that I could have this mood ring, and I'd give, like, everybody would buy a mood ring, or I'd give mood rings out, and then everybody would wear the mood ring, and then the mood ring would change colors based on my emotional state. And everybody had to, like, wear my emotions on their finger, like, oh, the artist is moody today.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Like a small lava lamp.
I love that. Well, I think that's a great place to end on. We touched so many things that I'm surprised we were able to fit it all in.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching the studio soundtrack. The music featured in this episode is by Yesun, and it is edited by Caitlin Kelly. Don't forget to leave a rate.